at my age, you can't just go out and get a job with a corporation and work for the next 20 years. If that's not realistic.
Yeah.
So people do need these benefits. So, but how are you going to continue to fund it? What do you think?
But I'm not carrying papers on me, right? Like your driver's license is not proof of citizenship. You can have a driver's license as a green card holder or as a visa holder. Like it's not a proof of citizenship, right? And I'm not carrying my passport with me at all times or my birth certificate. And the fact that you can just have somebody harass you, that's about us.
There has to be some kind of law and order when it comes to immigration.
So if you are in this administration and you're breaking the law, I want you to know that you'll be held accountable.
Do you think Democrats need to clean up their own house with respect to that? Everybody thinks that everybody in Washington is on the take, and Donald Trump is just open about it. Welcome to Ageless with Jane McGarry, where we celebrate vibrant health, self-care, timeless style, and finding purpose at every age. Because around here, age truly is just a number. We are taping today's episode on Election Day. 1 year from today will be the midterms. Voter interest is huge at this point. And I just out on my social media, I was like, what issue are you interested in? What affects your life? And the things that people said were things I'm interested in too: the price of groceries, inflation, Social Security, Medicare, healthcare, all those kind of things. But here's one thing that really kind of surprised me, to be honest with you. I mean, I think it's a good thing. So many of you said, I'm interested in bringing our country back together again. I was really shocked. There were so many people who said that. So that's one of the questions I'm going to pose to my guest today, who's going to join me. My guest is a Dallas native. He went to Hillcrest High School. You probably know him as an NFL linebacker. He was also captain of the squad, the Baylor Bears. He is a father, a husband, and U.S. Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Welcome, Colin. It is so good to see you again. Happy Election Day.
Yeah, happy Election Day to you, Jane. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Have you been out and voted?
Yeah, my wife and I voted at the last day of early voting over at Samuel Grand Rec Center, which is where we often vote. So,
yeah. So here's what I'm interested in knowing. You've been out for the last year. It was a year ago, pretty much, that you left Washington. You've been out for the last year. I've seen you on social media talking to people about, you've been to construction sites, you've been to football fields all over the place, talking to people about what their concerns are, what issues they're interested in. And what is there a common thing people are saying to you?
I think there is. And I think you're right to point out that people want to find a way to come back together. I think there's a deep anxiety about where we're going and a fear that we're forgetting some of our most fundamental kind of, values. I think one of those is the idea that if you work hard and play by the rules, that you should be able to get ahead, right? Like, we've all grown up with this idea that, okay, if we keep our ducks in a row, if we work really hard, that our kids are going to do better than we did, that we're going to be able to provide, right? That there's going to be an upward trajectory to life, And I think that for a lot of people, they feel like that is very much at risk, and that they feel like they're actually working harder and doing the right things, and they're not getting ahead. And at the same time, because of social media and because of the internet age that we're in, people can follow very clearly what's happening for other people who they see that are cutting corners, maybe a bit corrupt, that they're doing just fine. And I think there's a real friction there that people feel that, hey, listen, this is not right. Like we should have a system where, like doing the right things is rewarded. And that, being somebody who cares about your community is rewarded. And that many of the things that I'm trying to train my boys to be every day is that you want to see in your public officials, or you want to see in public life. But instead we're seeing oftentimes the opposite. Like I'm telling my kids all the time, we're not bullies. We never bully. We don't lie. We don't demean. We try and, help out people. And I think they're seeing, the opposite of that. And I think there's a real concern.
So how do you win those people back?
It comes down to, a category of 4 or 5 things. It's healthcare, it's childcare, It's the cost of housing. It's the cost of education, right? And I would throw in there senior care as well, because so many families are multi-generational homes now. And listen, my grandmother moved in with us when we were in high school, when I was in 10th grade at Hillcrest, because she was in Brownsville and she'd fallen and then she came to live with my mom, right? And so, and then you have 3 generations living in the same home. So these are the pressure points that many working families are going through.
With respect to healthcare, Obamacare, one of the things that I've tried to understand it, I find really, really difficult. But it seems like to me one of the things that's a problem, let's just say it's a given that everyone is entitled to basic health care. But if I understand it correctly, with Obamacare, there's no restriction really on what healthcare facilities can charge like there is in Medicare. So you've basically got a system where people can get as much care as they want, and the hospitals and everybody else can charge as much as they want. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that can't work. So would you, for instance, support bringing Medicare type regulations on what healthcare can charge to Obamacare in order to help solve that problem?
Yeah. So the issue with, the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare is just that it's just private insurance. That's what it is. So it's a private insurance market, and it's saying that if you don't have insurance through your employer or insurance through Medicaid or Medicare, then you can get insurance through these private companies, and we're going to subsidize you if you can't afford it, so that you can still have health insurance, right? And those subsidies are the ones that have expired. That's why people are going to feel a dramatic increase in their costs if they don't do something in DC. That's what this shutdown in many ways is about, right? And so that's always been a bit of a problem, because private insurers, their interest is still having a profit margin, right? And so they're always going to they want to make money. And what we're basically doing is saying to them, okay, you keep doing whatever you're doing and we'll just cover some of that cost.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah, that doesn't work.
And that's always been a problem. It always has been. This is why I've always thought that we need to have a competitor in that space, which is a government provided option, what we used to call the public option. You can call it whatever you want, where it will be based on a Medicare type payment structure, and say, okay, listen, this will be a low cost option that you can take, and it has some of these price controls, baked into it. There's going to be so many people using it that negotiating power allows it to have force. And then the private insurers will have to compete with that option, so they can't get their costs too out of line, because then nobody would be taking their choices. But if you want to pay for more coverage, you can do that, right? And that's a choice that people can make.
I want to go to corruption, because that is another part of your platform at this point. And if we talk about corruption right now, it looks like to me we have a president who is taking crypto from anybody in the world as payment for anything. We don't know what the payment is for. There's no way of knowing how much it is or what it's for. We got a ballroom that's being built with a lot of donor dollars, and I'm pretty sure Amazon might want something in return. At the same time, Republicans will tell you, and frankly, I'm neither. I'm in the middle somewhere. But Republicans will tell you that they'll say Nancy Pelosi got rich on stock prices, and she insider trading. This not technically insider trading, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
okay, so my question is this. You talk about corruption. Can you talk about, bring it home, what is the cost of corruption to me, to somebody who's watching? And what do you propose in the way of reform? Because almost everybody thinks that everybody in Washington is on the take, and Donald Trump is just open about it.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a real problem for us. But the cost of corruption is that when decisions are made, they're not made in your interest. They're made in the personal interest of the person who is receiving that benefit or the person who's giving that benefit. Right? That's the cost of corruption. So
give me an example. Give me an example.
Like when a bill is passed, or when the budget is passed, and you see these loopholes for certain industries, and you wonder, how did that industry get a special loophole just for them? Well, it's because they gave enough money to the right person, so they then got a loophole, but you didn't. You, Joe Regular, sitting at home, did not, because you don't have a lobbyist, you don't have a big contribution to give, and so you got screwed while they got by, right? And I think that's the baseline issue here, right? Is that when decisions are being made, and that every system is not perfect, Churchill said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, right? But
Right.
that we, as much as possible, try and make sure that the decision matrix that the people who are making decisions go through is with you in mind, as opposed to themselves or somebody who is trying to get a benefit from them in mind, right? And so how do we narrow that path, right? And to me, you have to find the pressure point to say, okay, well, where are the areas where this is allowing outright corruption to make it so that you're getting hosed? And you're right to point out the ballroom, for example, which is, if you're giving $30 million for some ridiculous ballroom that's going to go up, they are not doing that with a lack of interest,
It's
right?
like, duh.
They're expecting their payoff, right? And their payoff will come in government contracting. It'll come, in benefits. It'll come in loopholes, but they will get that money back, right? Companies are not in the business of giving away money, even to Donald Trump, right? And so, to me,
So what is your
yeah,
solution?
there's the pressure points are campaign finance. We have an inherently corrupt system, and particularly corporate PAC donations. I never took them. I think they should be banned. But I think we need to overturn Citizens United. We need to get big money out of our politics. Or at the very least, you need to know exactly who's paying for what when you're seeing it on your TV, in your mailbox, or on your computer screen, or on your phone. It should say, just like when you watch an ad about, the newest prescription drug and it's AstraZeneca's paying for it, it should say, this ad brought to you by Amazon, who is, supporting this politician because they've done this. You know what I mean? Like, transparency is also important. So if we can't do that, then we at least have to have transparency. For individual members of Congress and senators, the inherently corrupting fact is that for many people, they want to make more money than what they're making in public service. I'm sorry, but public service is not there for you to get rich. I never traded a single stock in my 6 years in Congress. I never would. I felt like I had insider information because I did, right? And so we can ban that, and we can say that you are not allowed to do that. But beyond that, I think we also have to look at this and say, okay, if we're asking our politicians to make these decisions, and let's make sure that for some people who might be working class people, that they can afford to run for office and to serve in office as well. And so is it a housing issue? Okay, well, we can do something on housing, right? If you're a working class person coming from an expensive place, that might be an issue for you. But we should look at that and say, how can we remove some of these potentially corrupting efforts? But the biggest thing to me, I think, is on the outright corruption that we're seeing, where this massive buying off of the president is occurring right now. And this is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This has never occurred in any other administration. We've never seen a Gulf state give a jet to the president of the United States and say, here's your personal jet for your use and for no one else's use. We've never seen, as you said, them buying into a huge crypto scheme where your family was going to make billions of dollars and there's going to be no limit on this. And so it used to be that you were required to divest yourself from your economic interests when you held high office. That has been basically ignored by this president. That's because it was mostly a norm. Some people might remember that Jimmy Carter sold his peanut farm when he was.
I do. I remember. I'm that old.
Right. So we need to now make that a law, right? That it is not a expectation, but it is a law that is required, that the president of the United States must be divested from at least have no direct interest in what they're doing. And these are all things that we can do. This is not dramatic things, and it wouldn't help Democrats or Republicans. I think it's just common sense.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back,
you got this tech who's going to squirt some jelly on your wife's stomach and going to do something, and then you don't know if they're going to find a problem. If they do find a problem, all you want to hear is, okay, here's the plan to make sure that your wife's going to be okay, that the baby's going to be okay. If you are in this administration and you're breaking the law, I want you to know that Donald Trump will not be president forever, right? And that at some point, the law of this land will apply to you too.
I'm really excited to offer you something starting in 2026. This podcast is for women who are interested in being lifelong learners, living as well and as long as we can in a wonderful, purposeful way. Well, one of the things I love to do most is travel. And beginning in 2026, I have exciting travel opportunities to offer to you. I have chosen a provider who I trust because I have known Casey with Sharon Car Travel for years now. Casey has traveled all the continents. He's been all over the world. And if you have any travel needs at all, whether it's a tour with me or maybe you just want to go somewhere on your own, Casey at Sharon Car Travel will take you there safely, in style, and you'll have a wonderful time. Thank you, Sharon Car Travel, for being one of the sponsors of Ageless with Jane McGarry and supporting all of us women. Okay, let me move to Social Security and Medicare. What I constantly hear is, how are we going to continue to fund this? People paid into it. They deserve it. I mean, I will tell you, at my age, you can't just go out and get a job with a corporation and work for the next 20 years. That's not realistic.
Yeah.
So people do need these benefits. So, but how are you going to continue to fund it? What do you think?
Yeah, and I think, I hear a lot of discussion around, okay, let's raise the retirement age. And okay, that might sound good for certain people, right? But for people who are working, up the sweat of their brow, who are the ones who are building and restoring I-75 out of here, like you can't just tell them wait a few more years, right? Like, because they are counting the days until they hit these milestones, right? And so I think that doesn't make any sense. And I also think that what we're talking about here is that the most vulnerable people, the people who really are going to rely on these services, are the ones they have to be preserved for, right? And on Medicare, I mean, every few years there's always a big attempt to try and kind of rob Medicare to pay for other things, and I think there's no program that has been, I think, more successful at keeping older Americans having the ability to have some dignity as in their retirement than Medicare. My mom got breast cancer just after she got on Medicare, and because she was on Medicare, the costs were not through the roof, even though she had to have a mastectomy and all kinds of treatment afterwards. It was somewhat affordable. So we have to protect Medicare, and I think we have to make it better. And I think we need to expand the services that it offers and make sure that it's competitive, because many doctors, as you know, Jane, are no longer taking Medicare. And that to me is a big concern of mine. And so I think, particularly on some of the reimbursement rates, which is too much in the weeds, we have to raise some of those so it's more competitive. On Social Security, this is something where if we don't take action, the Social Security Trust Fund will run out of funds, right? And partly what we're seeing here is that we have the baby boom generation, a huge amount of older folks who are coming on Social Security, and not enough workers who are paying into it to keep the system solvent. But it's also true that we're not treating every kind of income the same. And so if you're working for a living, you're paying Social Security tax. But if you're getting capital gains, there's no Social Security tax on that, right? Or if you're above a certain amount of money, if you're above $175,000, then you don't pay any more tax on that, right? And I think we have to look at that and say, okay, it's obviously true that we're not treating all income the same, that we have some incredibly wealthy people who, after a certain point, are not paying into the system anymore. We should be asking more of them and also treating income the same across the board when it comes to Social Security, so that we're all going to have it solvent. And the last thing I'll just say is we need more workers. And that means also fixing our making sure that our young people can get into good jobs, but also having an immigration system that actually works, so that we bring people in, they can continue to refresh our economy.
Okay, I want to move to immigration. As a woman I just watched this morning, a woman in Chicago who was a U.S. citizen, who was brown-skinned, get pulled out of her car by ICE, handcuffed. She was held for several hours. Seeing masked men hitting people in vans and stuff like that is terrifying to me and to a lot of other women. At the same time, there has to be some kind of law and order when it comes to immigration. A good immigration policy, it seems to me, would be a smart thing to do. So how would you balance the need for order and enforcement with protecting vulnerable populations and doing this in a different way?
This is just so important that we talk about this, because I think that we've often made immigration seem like it's either no restrictions or it's all enforcement. And there's no other area that we treat like this. We need to have a comprehensive reform to our entire immigration system for many reasons, but partly to deal with what you're talking about right now, which is this incredibly, I think, abusive use of ICE. The Supreme Court has said that they can now ethnically profile, so they can just pull someone over if they look brown or if they look like they could be an immigrant and ask them for their papers. And I don't know about you, but I'm not carrying papers on me, right? Like your driver's license is not proof of citizenship. You can have a driver's license as a green card holder or as a visa holder. Like it's not a proof of citizenship, right? And I'm not carrying my passport with me at all times or my birth certificate. And the fact that you can just have somebody harass you, based on that, that's not about that person that's being harassed. That's about us. Like, when the way we treat people is not about who they are or what they did or what they're going through. It's about who we are. And, we have these procedures and due process and these things in place in our criminal justice system, but also in our immigration system, not because of who those folks are, but because of the agreement that we've made as a society that we're going to treat people a certain way. And we're losing that right now. But this can be fixed. And so what I worked on when I was in Congress was a legislation that would increase border security, which we do have to have a secure border, but to do it in a smart way, we need more technology along the border, particularly to scan the massive amount of trade that is coming across. If you're wondering how drugs get into the United States, it's not by people carrying it in individually. It's through our ports of entry, right? And so but we have the technology to capture this, but it's expensive and we have not made a full investment in it. We need more agents to work on these things. We need more immigration judges, more administrative personnel, so we can handle the folks who are coming and who are seeking asylum. That's part of it. The other part of it, though, is that our legal immigration system is broken. And if the talented kids who are at UTD or at SMU who are here on student visas who want to stay don't know if they can. And I've talked to these kids before, and I know that they're hoping that they'll maybe find a sponsor who can keep them along with a visa while they go into the process of trying to get their green card. But if they don't get that, then they might have to go to Canada, or they might have to go back to India, or they might have to go where they came from. But they want to stay here. And we are not, our system is so broken that they are having a hard time even navigating it. So we have to fix our broken legal immigration system. And the last part, which is what we're seeing playing out in our cities across the country, and I saw up close in the Valley in South Texas, is what we're going to do about folks who are here, who are undocumented, and particularly those who have been here for a long time, who have been, playing largely by the rules, have not broken the law, who have been paying taxes through the payroll taxes, and who want to stay. And to me, it doesn't make any sense to say we're going to go in and we're going to start ripping apart families. We're going to be sending home, sending back people who maybe have been here for 20 years and who have grandchildren here and are part of their communities. That doesn't make any sense. But it also doesn't make any sense to keep them in this position of limbo where there's no option to try and pursue legal means of being here. And so that is where we talk about, let's provide, a different pathway out for this, whether it's, trying to get into the line for citizenship or just pursuing, work visas or whatever the choice that they want to go down that road is. Let's just recognize that we have millions of people here who are falling into these categories and who we need to do something about to create a legal pathway. And particularly for our dreamers, these young kids who were brought here when they were babies by their family members, and this is the only country they've ever known. That to me is a must. And so we have legislation, just so you know, Jane, like we know what this looks like, and it's actually bipartisan. I've worked on it, right? What we have never had enough of is the political willpower and the guts to actually do it, because then they're going to run an ad saying that you are for, whatever horrific thing has happened, in the last year or year and a half. And they're going to say that you're all these things, but what they want in many cases, and when I say they, I mean the people who use this as a wedge issue, is they want to keep it as a problem so they can keep campaigning on it instead of fixing it. We have not had a big reform to our immigration system since Ronald Reagan was in the White House. That's when I was like, a little tyke, right? So like, we have got to, be serious about this. And every major country in the world, wants what we have, which is that everybody in the world wants to come here. The best and the brightest person, living, in far-flung countries around the world is thinking, wouldn't it be great if I could come to America? And as long as that remains the case, we will be just fine, right? But if we ever let that light go out or make it too hard for that person to come, that's when we'll get in real trouble.
Do you have any concern that, as I said, U.S. citizens, brown-skinned U.S. citizens being rounded up, combined with federal agents, federal monitors at polling places in 2026 could make some minorities fearful of going to the polls?
Yeah, I mean, after my football career, I was a voting rights lawyer, and when I did voting rights work, we were always concerned about, intimidation, because it's actually easier to intimidate many people than folks might believe. There's a lot of folks out there who are afraid of interacting with a system that they, fear might get them caught up. I remember trying to register some guys in South Dallas once, and two of the guys were like, "No, I'm not going to do it. I got parking tickets," because they were worried just registering to vote would make them official, and it is very real. And so I am concerned about it. I'm concerned mostly though about what I'm hearing about these families. And when I was in the Valley, my family's from Brownsville, and so I spent a lot of my childhood there. And when I was last there, I was hearing from these teachers about these kids who were having to take anti-anxiety medication because they were worried that, while they were at school, they're going to come home and one of their loved ones was going to be gone, or that they were running around on the playgrounds. And, kids like to scare each other when they're running around, and instead of playing, monsters or like what my kids will do, like they were, playing like La Migra, like chasing you, like the immigration is after you. And the traumatic effect that's having on families, and the small businesses down there, in many cases, are experiencing a 50% reduction in traffic and in business, because folks are afraid to come out to buy things, and they're afraid to go to the flea market. They're afraid to go to the hardware store, and so they're not spending as much money. And so it's going to have an economic impact too. And I think we need to recognize that for Texas, this is a huge problem. So yes, I'm worried about the election, but I'm more worried in the meantime about the pain that's being inflicted. And I think what we have to do in the election is stand up to this and say, we're going to vote because we know our vote is powerful, and we're going to vote for people and for policies that will treat folks more humanely.
I'm going to ask you a question that I know has been asked of you a million times. Well, I don't know. I don't know if people have asked you this, but I know people think it. So I want to ask it. With all of the anti-woke, anti-DEI, erasure of history that is going on right now, what would you say to people if you were genuinely trying to, what would you say to people if they say to you, but minorities have had an advantage lately? I know you've heard this.
Yeah.
What is your response to that?
Listen, I genuinely think that we have a great story to tell as a country. And that story is one that is not that we always got it right, but that we've been trying to perfect our union over time, and that we've made dramatic progress in certain areas, but that we still have more work to do in other areas. But that where we'd like to get is to a point to where, we can just, kind of roll the cards out there and let everybody, see what they can become. But that what we also recognize is that, in certain areas, we might have some more work to do than in others, but that where we are now, I think as a society, is largely one where it's working people who are being screwed over regardless of their background and of their racial background. And that what we are seeing is that the biggest divides in our society, as I see it, are not, purely racial, but they're socioeconomic, right? It's whether or not your zip code, the school that your kid is able to go to, the programs that you have access to, and that if you're part of that, then if you're part of a prosperous area, that your kid's chances of succeeding are going to be much higher than someone who's coming from, a poorer background. And that's always been the case, but the gap has gotten too large, right? And the ladders of opportunity, I think, have gotten too narrow. And so I'm not entirely against the idea that what we need to be focusing on, is largely how can we create opportunity, based on helping, working people and folks who are used to call, poor people, how we can make sure that they are able to access the same ladders of opportunity as everybody else, and that will be have a more leveling effect than any other policy. And to me, you know, I saw this play out in my life, right? Like I went to Hillcrest, which is a very diverse school, but we had poor Latinos, poor African Americans, poor white kids there, and the options that were often available was the military, hourly work, or if you were able to get into a good community college or go to 4-year degree program. And what I've seen now is that there's even more options being offered, which is great. We're bringing back the trades. We're bringing back skilled skills, and we're introducing young people to the idea that, hey, listen, you can become a plumber. We can't automate this job. We can't offshore this job. AI is not going to take it away, and you can make 6 figures, right? And we don't have enough of these. And so that's what I'm most interested in. I know there's always going to be areas where we have to be concerned about discrimination. And that I think has to be targeted. Okay, we're going to go after and make sure that people are not being discriminated against. But as a broader policy issue, I really think that what we have to be focused on is lowering those ladders of opportunity so they're in place for anyone to take advantage of. And let's like make sure that those are actually functioning. Because since they're not right now, this is not fair for anyone.
A lot of women have asked me to ask you what you're going to do to stop the erosion of women's rights and women's reproductive rights, health rights.
Yeah, Allie and I have had 2 boys at Baylor Hospital here in the last 6 years. So I guess we're about a year out of diapers from Cameron. And I just say that to say that I still remember very directly, and it seems like just yesterday we were going through our pregnancies, and I've told this story before, but it's still true that I would just hold my breath at every one of our ultrasound appointments. I didn't know what they were going to say. I mean, you got this tech who's going to squirt some jelly on your wife's stomach and going to do something, and then you don't know if they're going to find a problem. If they do find a problem, all you want to hear is, okay, here's the plan to make sure that your wife's going to be okay, that the baby's going to be okay. And that's not what people are hearing in Texas right now. That's just not. I mean, we have several friends who are OBGYNs, and someone like Dr. Austin Denard, who's a friend of mine, who she grew up basically 10 minutes from where I grew up. We're about the same age. She noticed herself on her own ultrasound that her baby's skull was not forming, and she knew that she was going to have to leave the state to make sure that this pregnancy that was completely non-viable and that was going to be incredibly dangerous for her, that it wasn't going to have to be forced to go to term, right? And I do mean forced, right? And so, to me, I don't understand this idea that we're going to tell women and doctors, what's best for them and for their families and for their lives. I've never understood it. I think that for 50 years, we had a system that while people argued about it, it was largely one that had, some restrictions in place, but that said that particularly in these most personal decisions that women in consultation with their doctors and their family and, oftentimes their faith can make these decisions, that we need to go back to that. And so Roe v. Wade was a court case. It was overturned by the Supreme Court. But the principles in Roe v. Wade can be made into a law through legislation. And I voted for and passed legislation in the House called the Women's Health Protection Act that would make Roe v. Wade the law of the land again. We unfortunately could not get that through the Senate at the time, so it didn't pass. When I'm in the Senate, I will bring that legislation back up, and I think we can get it passed. And I think we have to for Texas. I can't tell you how many people tell me what's happening in our medical schools is a huge concern, that OBGYNs don't want to practice in this state, that we are going to approach a cliff here where we won't have enough people to deliver the children. in this state, or to care for women in this state. That when the business leaders, when they're having a conversation about recruiting talent to come into the state to work in their business in high positions, that they're being asked, well, what about this abortion ban that you have in place? What if my wife gets pregnant? What if I get pregnant? What if we want to, what if we have a problem with our pregnancy? What are we going to do in your state? This is going to impact every area of our lives. And I think we have to end this. And so I feel incredibly strongly about this, that we have to go back to the standard that we had under Roe v. Wade, that we can do it. This is what majority of Texans also believe. In poll after poll, we see that. We have to have leaders who actually do it. That's what I plan on doing. And so I'm very concerned about this. The longer we go with this in place, the worse it's going to be for Texas and for our country.
And we're going to also look at a lot of other things when we come back.
Particularly when I see a Black Hawk helicopter being used above an apartment building in Chicago in the middle of the night, dragging out, in some cases, children from apartments. The law is being broken there, right? And I want folks to know that accountability is also about making sure this doesn't ever happen again. Instead of saying, let's just go back to the way it was, let's say, okay, well, then what do we need to reimagine to make sure this is a fair system going forward?
What's the scariest thing to most people? Public speaking. Whether it's in front of a crowd or if you're just speaking to a camera on your social media. Most people are terrified of public speaking, and sometimes they miss opportunities because they don't know how to promote their product or to speak well when it comes to public speaking. I've been doing public speaking all my life. I've been in front of a camera all my life, and I've done a lot of public speaking in front of crowds. And I have learned some tips and tricks that will help anybody. If you're trying to improve your communication skills, whether it's a video you want to do for social media, or maybe you have to speak in front of a corporate board, maybe you want to be better on your Zoom calls. I have all kinds of techniques that I teach. I do a master class for corporations that need someone to help them teach their executives, teach their doctors, their lawyers, other professionals who may have a lot of knowledge but don't always communicate it well. Jane McGarry Media is my website. You can book a consultation with me. I would love to help you. Is there anything you see in the current administration that you believe or that you would support if you're elected, taking a look at in terms of prosecution? And if so, what is the action and who would be the person who should be looked at to be prosecuted?
Yeah, one thing I want to get us back to feeling is that prosecutorial decisions are not made by politicians. They're not made by the president. They're made by prosecutors who have to go to a grand jury to get an indictment. The indictment is also reviewed by a judge, and that this is not done as some form of retribution or anything like that, but it's done because nobody's above the law and the law applies equally to everyone, right? And I want us to get back to that, because this idea that we're just going to prosecute former officials because we don't like them, or people who are in office because we don't like them. This is a path to complete ruin for us, like just outright ruin. But so is the violation of the law going unpunished, right? So if you are in this administration and you're breaking the law, I want you to know that Donald Trump will not be president forever, right? And that at some point, the law of this land will apply to you too, right? And so conduct yourself according to the law. I was an official in the Obama administration. I would have never dreamed of just breaking the law and hoping that I could get a pardon, right? I felt bound to it. I also took an oath to the Constitution to uphold the laws of the Constitution, and I believed in that oath. I want these folks in every single one of these offices, particularly when I see a Black Hawk helicopter being used above an apartment building in Chicago in the middle of the night, dragging out, in some cases, children from apartments. The law is being broken there, right? And I want folks to know that accountability is also about making sure this doesn't ever happen again. We have a lot of reasons why we have criminal law in this country. We do it, for many different purposes. One of them is to prevent it from happening in the future, or to say to other people, if you do this, you'll also get a punishment. And I want, prosecutors to be able to look at this objectively, to take their evidence, to grand juries, and to be able to say, if the law was broken, then you will not be held, you'll be held accountable. And so I don't know exactly which areas that'll be, and I don't actually want to be the one to determine that. I want that to be done, consistent with our system of government, and not in the form of retribution, but in the form of, believing in and upholding the Constitution.
Do you think Democrats need to clean up their own house with
For
respect to
sure.
that?
100%. No, I mean, I don't know. I think we have to rethink many things coming out of this. And I'm not above, criticizing certainly Democrats. I do think that it's just true that, for example, January 6th, people say, well, okay, this is political retribution. No, it's not. You attacked the Capitol of the United States and you broke the law, and so you're being prosecuted. That's the way it works, right? But I don't like this. I don't like some of what I see, the impulse growing. I see in some cases where people are saying, well, then just, lock them up. No, we don't do things that way. I just mean Democrats. I mean, as a country, we have procedures that are followed. And if those procedures are followed correctly, then it's not the perfect system, but it's the best one we got. Right. And I think there's plenty of room in the Democratic Party to criticize corruption. There's plenty of room to say that the law is being broken, in certain areas. Those people should be, prosecuted and have a chance to have their day in court. And if they're found guilty, then they have to, that's our system.
You've kind of led me to my last question. We're going through a real sea change right now, it seems to me. Not only with politics, but also with the specter of AI, maybe a universal basic income. It's all very, very confusing, and it's frightening. We've got inequality growing, like we were talking about earlier. Is it possible that there is opportunity in all of this?
Hmm.
And if there is opportunity, what do you see that opportunity as? What's your vision?
That's a great question, Jane. I really appreciate you for taking the time to talk to me. I've watched you my whole life, and I'm a big fan. Listen, I forest fires also create room for new growth, right? And the status quo is not working. Let's just be very clear about that, right? And I had a chance to speak to my law school's graduating class earlier this year, and I told listen, people were right to demand a change to systems that were not working. That doesn't mean that those systems have to be just destroyed with nothing to replace them, but they were right to demand that they change. And instead of saying no, let's just go back to the way things were, I think that's not only a losing political hand, it also just would not make any sense. So what we have to do, I think, is looking at this period, say, well, what have we learned and what do we know we need to fix going forward? And I think it's a time for dramatic change. I think it's a time for massive change that will hopefully reshape us and put us on a pathway towards something that's much more sustainable. Much of what we were existing on was set up, in the New Deal in the 40s, in the Great Society in the 60s, even Nixon in the 70s, much of what he did. And then there was not a lot done since then. And so many of these systems were half a century old and had never been reviewed, had never been, looked at for efficiency in many cases. And so to me, like the Department of Education, being dismantled is an opportunity to say, okay, well, what should the next Department of Opportunity, if it's going to be called that, look like, right? Should we expand its remit into making sure that we're also focusing on other avenues for success? If we were previously not doing enough to try and close some of these gaps, what could it be doing better? And so I think all of this is a chance to reimagine many of these things. I see the FBI and the Justice Department being, to me, abused and misused. But it was also an unfair system before that. And ask most African Americans that you come across, they'll say, listen, I think the justice system was already being applied unfairly, right? And so instead of saying, let's just go back to the way it was, let's say, okay, well, then what do we need to reimagine to make sure this is a fair system going forward? And so I see this as a time for thinking really big and for demanding big things. But I think to do that, and you mentioned AI, to do that, we have to have the structures in place to allow us to more efficiently respond to problems. And what I mean by that is it's incredibly difficult for this Congress and for this government to do anything at all. They can't keep the government open. We're in the midst of the longest shutdown, or one of the longest shutdowns in history, right? They can't agree on anything. When last Congress, we went 3 weeks without a Speaker of the House, and so we didn't even have any committees. We couldn't even do anything. It's in a country with 350 million people and all these things happening. This is not a way to govern. So we have to say this is not working. If we can fix this, we can make it more responsive to what people need. And so I have a lot of ideas on how we can do that, and I put it out in part of my corruption plan. But it begins with things like banning gerrymandering, fixing campaign finance, getting big money out of politics. And when you're able to do that, I'll just give you an example. Something like AI is going to require responsible legislation to set the rules of the road for it, and also to help the areas and industries that are going to be disrupted by it. It's going to increase productivity, but it's also going to remove whole areas of jobs that will be gone. They'll just be gone. And some of them are already gone, right? And so the government needs to, and the Congress is going to need to be able to pass laws to do that. But if you have a corrupt campaign finance system, then let's just use Amazon because we're beating up on them right now. Let's use that. Then they will be able to say, effectively, we can purchase enough politicians to prevent them from regulating us, right? That's a problem. That's a problem for us. If you feel like you can't take on an industry, then it's already gotten to be either the system's too corrupt or the industry's too big, right? And so we have to tackle that and say, okay, we're going to change this so that their influence is not so great that we can't treat them like we would anything else. And that'll allow us to be better responsive to these things like COVID and like what people are going through, like the coming disruption with AI, like, people's, I think, legitimate concerns around, how their family and whether or not they'll be able to get ahead, right? So but we have to fix these structural issues first to be able to be responsive to that. And so that's why fixing the Congress, restoring what I think is a functioning constitutional order will allow us to be more efficient on fixing these other things. And that won't help Democrats. It won't help Republicans. It'll just help everybody, right? And this is a problem when Democrats were in power. It's a problem now that Republicans are in power. We've just kicked the can down the road and not addressed it. I want to stop kicking the can. And I think because this has been such a big crisis, maybe it's a time where everybody's going to stop and say, hey, listen, we should really do something about this and let's get serious about it. But to do that, we got to elect people who want to do it, right? And that's what that's my pitch, Jane. I know this is not a political podcast, but not just in my case, but across the board, you got to start looking for people who want to fix these things. We can't keep sending people who want to be part of the problem to these offices, or they will just keep doubling down on the problem.
That's Tex-Mex in Dallas.
Oh, okay. That's a really tough one. Okay, so my wife and I, just so people know what we do, and please, keep this to yourselves, everybody listening to this. We go to Gloria's. We used to be able to walk there from our house in the M streets. Now we have to. We're a little bit further away, but we can drive to it. And it's. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm just saying it's where we're comfortable, right? And we sit on the patio. Y'all have a margarita, and relax. And you can see all the people walking up and down Greenville, and we enjoy it. So
one of my favorite memories in my entire life was at Gloria's when my son was about 2 years old and he was sick at Christmas. We couldn't see anybody else because he was contagious. So we went to Gloria's and the Christmas lights were all sparkling around us and it was Christmas Eve. It's one of my very favorite mememories.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You can sit out on the patio and nobody, will bother you and have some good food. And there's other great Tex-Mex. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, like, comfort is also part of it, right? So,
Cowboys prediction?
the Cowboys are in trouble. They're in trouble. You got to play defense at some point, and they can't play any defense. And I think that Dak has been playing very well. We have a good quarterback. We just don't have much of a defense. And as a defensive player, I kind of think, what did you think was going to happen? This, right? So.
Thank you so much, Colin. Really appreciate your time. I know that you're going to be very busy in the year ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Jane. I appreciate you. You're a leader for us here. And we all appreciate everything you've done for our community.
Thank you very much. Wasn't that fun? So, one of my beliefs about ageless is not only that we take care of our skin, we take care of our bodies and things like that, but also, for me at least, ageless means being involved in life, being involved in what's coming up in our world, in our country, in politics. That's one reason I wanted to interview Colin today, and I hope to, during this coming year, have a few other folks on who can talk to us about what their intentions are. Meanwhile, as always, thank you so much for being part of this conversation today. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your interest in knowing what's going on in the world around you, and I appreciate you being part of Ageless.